From 351 down to just 4. The Final Four tipping off this weekend in San Antonio. Coaches, athletic directors, pretty much everyone you can imagine flocking to San Antonio to watch Loyola, Michigan, Villanova, and Kansas duke it out for a national championship. And that's what we're here at the CBB Central podcast to break down. Kevin Sweeney, Brad Cavallero coming to you live, ready to break down what should be, a great Final Four, Brad. I'm really excited for it. I think there's going to be some great matchups, and certainly I think it'll be as high a level of basketball as you'll see all year. I know sometimes that wouldn't necessarily be the case with the Final Four because it's some of the just raw talent, but I feel like these are the 4 best teams in college basketball, teams that really play together, and that's something I'm really excited for.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you have Michigan and Loyola, who are, they've been so hot now for over a month, and Villanova, won the Big East tournament, so they've been pretty hot. Did Kansas win the Big 12 tournament?
I believe so.
So that's 4 conference tournament winners, teams that have not lost since the regular season, which is pretty rare. So yeah, we should definitely get some good basketball. A lot of skill in small ball going around, like not the most athletic teams, which is pretty interesting. No Kentucky with their massive glut of super athletic power forwards.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you look at it because I think it's easy to see similarities between all of these teams. Teams that have built through their backcourts, whether it's Clayton Custer and the Loyola backcourt, Michigan, built around guys like, obviously it's built around Wagner's the best player, but it's a team that's built around, spacing you out and having 3 to 4 guys on the floor at any given time who are just good shooters and can attack, whether it's Duncan Robinson playing the 4, a guy you can put the ball on the deck, things like that. And then Villanova, obviously a team that switches 1 to 5. Spellman's just been so impressive in this tournament to me as a guy. He shoots 44% from 3. It's kind of insane. And then Kansas is another team that's going to play LaGerald Vick / Svi Mikhailuk at the 4. 2 guys who can put the ball on the deck, shoot the 3. So you see these 4 teams who are all kind of embracing this modern basketball, this 4 out 1 in looks. 4 teams that play really good defense, even though they are undersized. Kansas plays solid defense. Obviously, Michigan has been talked about a lot all season as an elite defensive club. Villanova has excellent on-ball defenders. They're great on the perimeter. And Loyola, averages giving up just about 62 points a game, which is just kind of absurd. So I think, kind of looking at these 4 Final Four teams together, you can kind of make some generalizations about where teams should be going in terms of roster build and construction going forward.
Yeah, that was a great point about Omari Spellman. He's so good. Not a lot of people realize because he's being overshadowed by Bridges and Brunson and even Dante DiVincenzo a little bit. But Spellman is a legitimate, very excellent 3-point shooter. He puts the ball on the floor. I think he's a first-round NBA draft pick whenever he wants to come out. I know a lot of people kind of question things like regarding like his body, like he used to be very overweight and like his length, but I think he's such a good shooter that he will find a role even if his athleticism isn't up to NBA standards.
Yeah, like I don't think it's at all unreasonable to call Omari Spellman just like a flat-out elite shooter. Like, I mean, obviously we knew he could stretch the floor a little bit coming in. I don't think people expected him to shoot 44-45% from downtown, and I think some of that old bias comes into play here when we talk about NBA draft prospects. But I mean, if nothing else, he's 6'8", rebounds the ball really well, and shoots 45% from 3. Like, that's an NBA player to me. So I do completely agree with you, Brad. Obviously he's shooting a lot of threes. He's hitting 2 a game. This isn't, Omari Spellman steps out occasionally and impresses people by hitting a jumper. Like, he's consistently taking and making threes. I think he has to improve as a ball handler. Like, I think he definitely needs to stay 1 more year and just kind of develop some of those aspects as, being able to put the ball on the deck. Defensively, he's not great yet, but he looks better because of the system he plays in, just a great defensive system. So, he certainly has things to work on, but I definitely agree with you that the upside is there as an NBA prospect.
Yeah, definitely. One additional point I had about Spellman. I think that if he returns, which he should, I think he could be the favorite for a Big East Player of the Year next year. I know that Dante DiVincenzo is going to be on a lot of breakout player lists, but the conference lost so many seniors. Spellman has a chance to go and average 16, 17 points a game. I can't even really think of another great candidate off the top of my head. Maybe Shamori Pons, but that's going to be his stage. He's going to be on the national stage definitely next year if he chooses to return.
Yeah, the Big East does lose a lot of talent, and I think that definitely opens the door for a guy like Spellman, who's certainly has the potential at his size and shooting ability. But I think we'll have plenty of time to get into Big East preparations for next year over the offseason. We've got 2 Final Four games to preview. I'm sure that's why you're all listening. So let's get into that one let's get into that one without any further ado. Loyola taking on Michigan is the opener at 6:09 Eastern time in San Antonio. Brad, what are your initial thoughts on this ball game? Because to me, I think it's about as tough a matchup for Loyola as you could draw up, just because it's a team that's incredibly similar to Loyola.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I always want to look at with Loyola is can Cameron Krutwig stay on the court, and Wagner has the ability to pull him away from the basket, but Wagner I don't think is the type of athlete that's going to force Krutwig off the floor. I think Loyola does have a very interesting look with Jackson at the 5, but Krutwig I think can hold his own and make an impact on the glass and scoring in the post on Wagner. And then in terms of like the guard play, Loyola's perimeter defense is so good with Cluster and Ben Richardson that I think that they could really give guys like Rockman and Simpson some serious fits in the backcourt.
Yeah, I think the point you make about keeping Krutwig on the floor was something we talked about a lot in the preview to the Sweet 16 with Nevada, and would Nevada be able to force Cam Krutwig off the floor? And I think, in this game, I think Krutwig can play even if he gets pulled away from the basket, because I'm not necessarily afraid of Mo Wagner driving past Cam Krutwig. Mo Wagner is not an extremely quick guy who's going to, when you're dealing with Nevada, it was if they pull him away with Jordan Caroline can take him off the bounce. I'm not necessarily concerned if I'm Loyola that Cam Krutwig gets burned off the dribble by Mo Wagner. Now, I don't necessarily want him having to defend in space, but I don't worry too much that Cam Krutwig has to go out and maybe defend a 3 or 2. I think it'll be really interesting to see how Michigan's defense attacks Loyola, because we've seen all tournament that Loyola is so good, with their cutting, with their screening. They just do every little thing perfectly on offense, and I feel like Michigan's a team that does everything perfectly defensively. So, that matchup, to me, Loyola runs such clean offense. Can Michigan just get them out of their rhythm, get them out of their flow? I think that's going to be a challenge, because I think Loyola, for the most part, has looked comfortable on offense all tournament, except for the first half against Miami. They kind of struggled to kind of find the flow, but they've gained confidence, and you saw it especially against Kansas State, where they were just breaking him down for layup after layup and wide open 3 after wide open 3. So those are kind of the things I'm looking at. Michigan's just an elite defensive club. Luke Yaklich, the assistant from Illinois State who came over to Michigan, has really transformed that defense. So I'm really torn here on the pick. My gut is just that Loyola can't lose, because every time I've said, yes, this might be a tough matchup, there came Loyola and they found a way. So I'm going to roll with the Ramblers. They've been doing it all tournament, and they're going to do it one more time on Saturday evening.
Yeah, it is very tempting to go with Loyola. I think I'm going to go with Michigan, though. Michigan's been just as hot, and they're an excellent 3-point shooting team who can move the ball, and they have 4 or 5 guys on the floor at once who can put the ball on the floor and put pressure on the defense by attacking the basket. Thinking about it quickly, Miami certainly didn't have that with guys like Huell and Lawrence aren't the greatest penetrators. Tennessee with Grant Williams can put the ball on the floor, and Schofield can, but they're more of like one or two dribble guys. Nevada has a bunch of guys who can, but I think Michigan is a better shooting team. They're a little more disciplined. Nevada takes a lot of kind of rushed contested shots. Their guys have the ultimate green light on offense. But I think Michigan's discipline plus their shooting plus their ability to put it on the floor gives them the edge over Loyola. I just wanted to check. So Clayton Custer missed 5 games during the regular season, and Loyola went 2-3 in those games, which means that they're 29-2 with him.
Yes, indeed. They wouldn't have made the NCAA tournament because he missed the game against Milwaukee, and they lost to UW-Milwaukee on the road during Christmas week. That's kind of the standard right now that we hold mid-majors to, is lose your best player on the road against a mid-pack Horizon League team right before Christmas, and you lose the game, and there goes your tournament hopes. But that's just kind of my rant of the day. I will say one thing I am, concerned about if I'm Loyola. It's just the focus. Michigan's coaching staff, Michigan's players, they expect to be here. They've been to the Big Ten tournament, played at Madison Square Garden. They've dealt with all of this. Loyola made the Sweet 16, and obviously there would have been that concern of certainly it was a big deal in Chicago and it was a big deal on campus. But this is a national story. There's the video of Clayton Custer sitting on the student shuttle and the bus driver starting a "Let's Go Ramblers" chant, not realizing that Clayton Custer was on the bus himself. This team has been celebrities all week. They'll show up in San Antonio, kind of the darling of the tournament. How do they come in and focus for this game? Because obviously prepping for Michigan and everything they do both on offense and on defense is no small task. So certainly it'll be interesting to see how they come in, and will they be ready to play from the opening tip. I mean, I trust that they will be, because they've been such a good team about that all season. But the Final Four is a different animal.
Okay, so we have different picks for that first game. Moving on to Villanova and Kansas, 2 teams that are going to spread you out. They're going to shoot a lot of threes. They're probably going to go small. Kansas definitely goes small. Villanova maybe we'll see some Eric Paschall at the 5 when Spellman comes out, something that they haven't done as much this year. But this is going to be a great game if you like that spread, a lot of threes, fast pace, a lot of points scored, a lot of skill, and a lot of wings on the court. So Kevin, what are your kind of initial thoughts on this second, the late game in the Final Four?
Well, I kind of started off with my pick, and that's Villanova. Just the way they're playing in this tournament, they have the gear that no other team has, and when they hit that gear, they're pretty much unstoppable. And so, right off the bat, I just trust this Villanova team. I trust their guards. It's going to be interesting because Kansas has one thing that Villanova certainly does not, and that's Udoka Azubuike. Azubuike can dominate this game, whether Demir Cosby-Roundtree's guarding him, whether it's Omari Spellman, as we mentioned before, whether it's Eric Paschall. Azubuike is significantly bigger and significantly stronger and significantly more skilled in the post than any of those guys. Udoka has a chance to change this game, but obviously he has to stay on the floor. And I think Jay Wright is one of the better coaches at, taking away a mismatch. Against Alabama, when you watch the tape of what he did to Colin Sexton, basically Colin Sexton was swarmed all game, and they just took the ball out of his hands and took over that ball game. So, to me, I think Villanova will have to get creative, doubling whenever Udoka gets a touch, because I don't think they can handle him in the post. I think that's something that if Kansas is going to win, I think they're going to need a heavy dose of Udoka Azubuike. But I just trust Jalen Brunson. I think their wings, whether it's Brunson, Booth, Bridges, DiVincenzo, I think they'll do a really good job defensively on Kansas's. I think they match up extremely well in that regard, and they just do such a good job of getting great looks. So I'm going to roll with Villanova here. I think they match up pretty well. I think they're a little better version of what Kansas is this season.
I also have Villanova coming out on top in this one. I had Villanova winning it all in the like on Selection Sunday. So no reason to deviate here. They've looked impressive throughout. It is worth noting that DiVincenzo I think has kind of had a down tournament. I know he was really loose with the ball against West Virginia, and I think he had some similar issues against Texas Tech. But he's such a talented player. If he finds his his water level, then Villanova's is that much better. I kind of want to see too if Spellman can pull Udoka Azubuike away from the basket, maybe take him off the dribble and draw some fouls, maybe get Azubuike off the floor. While Silvio De Souza has played better in the postseason, he's a freshman, but I don't even think he's played half the season. I know he was kind of a late add, and then it took some time to get him eligible. So he's a very inexperienced player, and guys like Mitch Lightfoot can't match Spellman's mixture of strength and athleticism. So I think that's an area where Azubuike could definitely take advantage of Spellman on one end, but Spellman can equally take advantage of Azubuike. But it's different in the fact that a guy like Wagner, he's someone who is skilled and can play away from the basket, but he can also get out physical by a physical big. Where Spellman can step away and show some perimeter skill, but also is strong enough to compete with a bigger player inside.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And it kind of goes into what I wanted to say next is just how Villanova can beat you in so many ways. I mean, you look at the Texas Tech game. Villanova is a team that's thought of as one of the elite shooting teams in college basketball. They shot 33% from the field. They shot 4 for 24 or 17% from the three, but they still won that game and they were in control throughout. They got to the free throw line 35 times. They dominated a good Texas Tech team on the glass 50-28. They took care of the basketball and they turned it over 10 times. But then when you look at a game like West Virginia, when they hit 13 threes, or against Alabama, where their offense was really clicking. So, I mean, they can just beat you in so many ways. And I think that's what's dangerous is, this is a game where obviously they're going to be up against probably the best big man they've seen this tournament. But they still are going to, I think they'll still win the rebounding margin. This is a really good rebounding team throughout the season. They win the rebounding battle by about 2.5 boards per game, despite, all the talk about them playing, a 6'8" center and a 6'7" power forward. They still win the glass on a consistent basis. This Villanova team plays so well together and they scheme so well that I think a lot of the size concerns just kind of go out the window. So, for me, I'm just I think Villanova is gonna find a way, unless Kansas can really light it up from downtown and Villanova struggles in that area.
And Kansas has been getting great play this tournament from Malik Newman, who's really turned the corner as a combo kind of scoring guard, and then Svi Mikhailuk has really been hitting shots. But conversely, another area where Villanova is going to have a positional and matchup advantage is Eric Paschal versus Svi, where Paschal is so athletic that he can stay with perimeter players, and he's also strong enough to hold his own inside and kind of punish a wing like Mikhailuk, who's playing down a position, playing that power forward spot. Paschal is just he's been so undervalued these past 2 seasons for Villanova because of the versatility that he does bring and his aggressiveness and pursuit of rebounds, both offensively and on the defensive glass as well.
Yeah, Pascal's been a really great story because I watched him probably 4 or 5 times as a freshman at Fordham. And I mean, I came away obviously impressed with the physical tools, but the role that he was playing at Fordham was very much he was going to go get a bucket at all times. And I think you saw that with his numbers. He wasn't very efficient. I mean, he was kind of doing everything. He had to do pretty much everything for that team. And so when I saw him transfer to Villanova, I thought maybe he was a bit overrated because the numbers were a little higher than he probably should have been. He averaged 15 points, 5 rebounds in that season, but only shot about 42% from the field. But at Villanova, he's developed into this elite role player, basically. Obviously, he's not a great shooter, but he can step out and shoot the three. He's not a great post player, but he can, play out of the high post and do a lot of different things there. He's a great rebounder. He defends extremely well. He switches 1 to 5. He's kind of that perfect. He is, as I kind of alluded to, he's an elite role player. So I think it'll be really interesting to see his matchup with Mikhailuk. I think we saw in the Kansas Duke game, Mikhailuk kind of wore down towards the end of that ball game. Sure, he did hit a big shot late, but there were times where he really looked gassed from guarding a guy like Marvin Bagley. And obviously, Eric Paschal isn't Marvin Bagley, and it's a much easier task. But just dealing with that physicality, I think really will test the Mikhailuk throughout this game.
Definitely, and I also wanted to bring up, who do you think that Mikal Bridges is going to guard? Like, do you think that they'll put him on a guy like Malik Newman, who's been very hot of late, or do you think that they'll throw him on Devontae Graham and kind of slide Brunson to guard like a LeGerald Vick or even Svi?
I was just thinking about that, and I think what they do is they put Mikal Bridges on Devontae Graham, and then you put probably, I would say, Phil Booth on Malik Newman, and then go put Brunson on LeGerald Vick, and then go with Paschal on Mikhailuk. I just think, although I think there's actually like an interesting case for putting Brunson on Mikhailuk and Paschal on LeGerald Vick, because Paschal's the kind of guy who would be so athletic that Vick's athleticism won't bother him. He can go out to the perimeter. He can switch when they do kind of some of those ball screens, although they also go with Mikhailuk and some of those screen looks. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens there in the 3-4. But I think I'd put Bridges on Graham and force the ball out of his hands, because Graham is so good when he has the ball, even when he's struggling to shoot the ball. We've seen this in this tournament where he's just racked up the assists when he isn't shooting the ball well. I think if I put Mikal Bridges on him, I'm a lot more confident in stopping this Kansas attack, because if nothing else, you're just taking the ball out of his hands in many cases with his elite length.
Yeah, that's an underrated move that I don't think is utilized enough, and that is putting your long athletic wing on the point guard to kind of disrupt them with a size and length advantage. I know. I'm trying to think who. There was a team that would always do that to Providence and take Cartwright out of the game. For some reason, I can't think of it right now. But it is a very tried and true move. It's so effective. The only downside is if the point guard is quick enough to kind of exploit the slower wing defender. I know a guy like Marcus Howard torched Alpha Diallo during the Marquette Providence game, where Howard was just getting everywhere he wanted, even though Diallo had a significant length advantage and is very athletic in his own right. Howard, just was able to take him off the dribble. Mikal Bridges is in a different tier, like a totally different tier than Alpha Diallo, so he shouldn't have any problems sticking with and disrupting Devontae Graham. Was there anything else that you wanted to touch on in either of the Final Four games?
I don't really think so. I mean, I think they're gonna be really, really fun ball games. Brad, who do you think wins the national title? I know obviously Michigan versus Loyola's decision would be in question in this game, obviously as well. But who do you think comes away cutting down the nets in San Antonio in just about 5 days?
Gonna stick with Nova. They have so much experience, so many different parts. They can play different ways. They shoot the ball well. Great defense, great point guard, skilled center. I mean, we talked about Paschal for a while, this elite role player, and then they have 2 other double-figure scorers. I mean, that is quite the collection of talent, and I think that'll be too much to overcome.
Yeah, I think I'll go with you there. Feel bad against picking against the Ramblers because they've led me this far, and they've certainly. I mean, I legitimately think all four teams can win it. I think Loyola. I mean, obviously it's been talked about. Are they Butler? Are they VCU? Are they Wichita State? Teams that have made the Final Four from mid majors in the past, but they've beaten a high major foe in 3 of these 4 games. They can obviously handle the size and athleticism going up. I think they can absolutely win these games. I don't think either team scares them in terms of their physical makeup. In terms of Villanova or Kansas, should they advance, as I picked them to. But I feel like Villanova is just the best team in the country, and they'll find a way to bother Loyola if that matchup does come about. But I will be a huge Loyola fan this weekend. Let's put it that way. I'll actually be flying back into Chicago at about 6:40 Central, so about an hour and a half before the game starts. So who knows? Maybe I'll just stop at Loyola instead of going all the way up to Northwestern and go watch it at a Loyola watch party. That might be fun if they make it to the Chit.
That would be quite the experience. A team that hasn't made they haven't made the tournament since like 1984, right?
Yeah, but they have the only national title in Illinois basketball. So,
and then there's one other thing I mentioned before. Another wing guy who is great at taking point guards out of the game, who I couldn't think of earlier, was Kyrie Thomas.
I thought it might have been him because he took Bryant McIntosh out of the game earlier this season. I was floored by how good he was defensively.
He's so good. He's one of my favorite players in the country. And I think after like the 14th or 15th pick in the draft, I think so many different teams could use a guy like Thomas. I think he's a lock for a first round pick if he comes out this year.
He's one of those guys, and I think Bridges would be too. I just haven't seen him in person to say for sure. I knew Kyrie Thomas was a good defender. I'd watched him defend, and then I watched him in person, like pretty close to the floor against Bryant McIntosh, and was just like, oh my, like this guy is just unreal defensively. Just the way he takes guys out of the game. So he certainly, if he does enter the draft, we will have to see where he goes. But I would agree with you. I would draft him pretty high. I mean, any contender can use a dude who can go out and just flat out defend.
Yeah, and so many people are talking about D'Anthony Melton as a first round pick, which maybe I'm kind of on the fence with that. Think more of a second round for Melton, but Thomas is just a better version of Melton. So that's where I stand on this. So many D'Anthony Melton stands on Twitter.
So the other thing we wanted to get into is kind of the core of this podcast with some coaching changes. We'll also touch on the 3-on-3 tournament later, because I think that's something both me and Brad are pretty excited about. But there were 2 pretty massive moves this week, some smaller ones as well. But the 2 that jump off the page are Jeff Capel to Pittsburgh and Chris Mack to Louisville. Brad, I graded these 2 hires over on my website. I gave Chris Mack an A+, the only A+ I've given out, and I gave Jeff Capel an A-. I'll kind of explain that rating in a little bit. What did you think of these 2 hires? Let's start with Chris Mack and Louisville. It's kind of been rumored for a while, kind of college basketball's worst kept secret, but Louisville gets their man.
Yeah, I mean, you have to love this hire. From a Louisville perspective. Mac's been at Xavier for a while. He saw their transition from the A-10 to the Big East, which is a pretty big transition. And I think that they've made the NCAA tournament every year of the new Big East. And this year they were a number 1 seed. They were in the Elite 8 last year. They also had another Sweet 16 a few years ago. So it checks all the boxes you want. He's been recruiting at a high level. You got guys like Paul Scruggs, Najee Marshall, Trayvon Blewett were all top 50 recruits. He has the NCAA tournament success and he has the regular season success. And Louisville's a program where it's one of the top 10 jobs, in my opinion, in the country. If you factor in the sanctions, it's probably a worse job. But the fact that it has that much upside and has that much money to offer you, and that amount of resources, I think it was a no-brainer for both Mac and for Louisville, and it's it's a perfect marriage in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. As I said, I gave it an A+. I thought, I think Chris Mack is one of the top 10 coaches in college basketball. I mean, he recruits extremely well. I mean, I think people kind of overlook his recruiting because he doesn't get those one-and-done guys. But he brought in Najee Marshall and Paul Scruggs, both of whom I believe were top 60 players in the country last season. He develops guys in a really interesting way. I was reading about how he brings in guys, and it's just kind of a weird thing to do in this day and age of positionless basketball. But he position locks every freshman and just tells them to focus on that. So whether it's whether when you bring in these combo guards, especially, he position locks them to the point or the two and helps them. And I think that's a really interesting strategy of kind of developing guys, of not like blitzing them with, oh, is he going to be a point? Is he going to be a two? Let's have him run the offense, but only part-time in practice. Let's also get him some looks off the ball. This kind of idea of building from one position, and then you can build out as you go in your career. I thought that was interesting. But he got right to work too, Brad. I think he offered like 6 or 7 guys yesterday. They went out and offered Precious Achiuwa, Khalil Whitney, Greg Gant, Aiden Agihone, Isaiah Stewart, a bunch of 2019 kids. But the one guy I think to monitor, well, the two guys really are Courtney Ramey and Ashton Hagans. Ramey is a 2018 prospect, kind of on the top 50 fringe. Hagans, a guy who's one of the top players in 2019, but could very possibly reclassify. Louisville has a pretty big hole at point guard next year. They have Darius Perry, but other than that, no point guards. McMahon's not really a point. Dwayne Sutton's definitely an off-the-ball guy. They definitely could use – they need players in general, but they could definitely use a guy who could come in and run the show, whether that would be a guy like Hagans, a guy like Courtney Ramey, or a guy from the grad transfer market. But I could certainly see Hagans being a fit there. What are your kind of thoughts in terms of what he's going to do recruiting and the job he has to do to get this team competitive for next season?
Yeah, so you really hit the nail on the head there. Point guard's a huge hole. Perry started to play a lot better toward the end of the season, but he was more of like a scorer, in more of a shot first guy. So there's still definitely a role for Darius Perry. You're getting like a big athletic point guard like Ashton Hagans. Would be such a huge boost, especially because I think at this point Hagans will move to 2018. That's purely speculation on my part, but there are multiple teams that are going after him right now. I know Providence is, Memphis is, I think Georgia is too, who could really use a point guard for next season. I know he was heavily rumored to be a Kentucky lean if he were in 2019, but the Wildcats have Emmanuel Quickley, who is one of the top point guards. I think he's a top 10 player in the class of 2018, and Quade Green, who was a top 20 player in 2017. So he's a freshman this year, and he actually played pretty well for them, despite not being one of their traditional one and done guys. He's a guy who's going to be there for a few years. So Louisville should definitely take advantage of this new kind of boost in momentum and try to grab a guy like Hagans.
Yeah, and right now Louisville has 3 spots available in 2018. They also have, the potential that a guy like Dengadell or Ray Spalding could go pro, even a VJ King. So he's going to have, significant roster turnover to deal with. I know he had Evan Boudreaux committed, the grad transfer from Dartmouth to Xavier. He's a guy who has 2 years to play, average 17 and 10. Perhaps he'll follow to Louisville. He's a very talented player. But they'll have a lot of spots to fill. I think ball handler's the top one. But I think we both agree here it's a home run hire.
Absolutely. And then for Xavier, I know I've seen a lot of, you have to promote Travis Steele because that's like the tried and true method for Xavier. But I've been thinking a lot about this. It's kind of faulty logic to say, oh, Travis Steele will be a good coach because Chris Mack and Sean Miller were good coaches. It's certainly possible, maybe even probable that Steele, because Steele, made it to that top assistant for Xavier like Mack and Sean Miller had before, that, he will be an excellent coach. But the people that are saying, he will be the answer for Xavier because Chris Mack and Sean Miller took the same path. I think that's kind of faulty logic there.
Yeah, that's certainly fair point. I've heard nothing but great things about Travis Steele as a recruiter, as a person, as a head coach, potentially in the future. I think he'd do a really good job, but I agree with you that I think Xavier should do a full search here. Obviously, Xavier isn't like other jobs. Xavier, similarly to Butler, has the Xavier way in a certain way. And obviously it's not been trademarked the way Butler is trademarked the Butler way. But it's not a job that they're just going to go out and hire the best mid-major coach available and see what happens. I think this is a job where you're looking for someone in the family. And if you're looking for someone in the family, that's Thad Matta, that's Pat Kelsey, if Winthrop, who personally I don't love, is a choice, and that's Travis Steele. So if that's the route they go, I think Steele is certainly the guy, in my opinion. But if they open it up, it gets real interesting because all of a sudden you say Nate Oates, Mark Schmidt, Porter Mosier. There's pretty much every mid-major head coach sees Xavier as like the pinnacle of jobs, you would think, because they have all the resources and facilities of not of a blue blood, but of a high major program, but that mid-major basketball centric feel that I think a lot of those guys cherish. Porter Mosier is just a basketball guy. I can't see Porter Mosier having done 3 or 4 press conferences with him this season, being a guy who'd want to go work at, a school that was a football first school. He's a guy who I could see really loving the Xavier job. Now, would Xavier want him over Travis Steele? I don't know. I mean, Porter Mosier's has had a solid career, but before this season hadn't finished over 5th in his conference in quite a while. So, I mean, certainly there's some names out there that make sense for Xavier. My gut says it's Travis Steele, but as you said, Brad, I agree. I think they do need to go through the process and not just name Travis Steele head coach right away.
Yeah, and then I also wanted to point out that this Xavier job is kind of in an unprecedented kind of place because it's not the same job as when Chris Mack was promoted or when Sean Miller was promoted. They're in the Big East now. They have a whole new kind of brand equity. Like they were a number 1 seed this year. They've been getting top 50 recruits, pretty regularly. They have a roster full of top 100 talent. So I don't think that it would be crazy to suggest that they could get, one of the hottest names out there. I know you mentioned Mark Schmidt. I don't know if he pulled his name out of the Pitt search or said he was staying at St. Bonaventure, kind of different. Maybe he would be willing to go to Xavier. I think that would be a good guy to look at because, he's at such a disadvantage at St. Bonaventure compared to the rest of the conference in terms of location and kind of resources. So he's a guy who I think almost every kind of Northeast to Midwest high major team should consider if they have an opening. And then regarding Porter Mosier, I know I saw today on Twitter that he was a walk-on at Creighton, so he kind of has that Big East connection. But in terms of his resume, before this season, he hadn't finished over 500 in the league since 2003 when he was the head coach of Arkansas Little Rock, and he was 8-6 in the Sun Belt. And his best conference record before this season was 2001 at Arkansas Little Rock, his first year as a head coach, when he was 9-7. So, I mean, that's a pretty long stretch of kind of mediocre to poor records until this breakthrough season.
Yeah, Porter's been kind of it's been a tough spot. Obviously, he struggled at Illinois State. I think everyone agrees that was not a good stretch of his coaching career. Went to Loyola and he's had some nice years. He won a CBI. He had to move up in conference. It's a significant jump between the Horizon League and the Missouri Valley. We saw Valpo this year coming last in the the Missouri Valley. Despite being a program that I think a lot of people trust, Loyola was not a program that was in a good spot when it came, let alone in the Horizon League, let alone coming up to a better conference. So he's had to build it up. But, right now Porter Moser has an outstanding staff. He has Drew Valentine, who kind of gets the headlines, but also Brian Mullins, I believe his name is. I know his last name is Mullins. He's a tremendous coach. I've heard nothing but good things about him as an assistant. He recruits extremely well. I've heard some people at SIU want him over the job. They want to fire Barry Hinson and hire Mullins. So this is a really great staff. Clayton Custer somewhat fell into their lap, with his boyhood friend Ben Richardson on the Loyola team when he transferred. Marquise Towns was an underrated kid, Dante Ingram. So they certainly come into a little bit of everything. Not to question the job Porter Moser's done with this group, because he's done an outstanding job. But I think if I'm Porter, I stay at Loyola. He's got great momentum there. He's recruiting extremely well. And I think he's a really good coach, but I think there is naturally cause for pause when you look at the resume beyond this year.
And if you had told me, let me rephrase that. So when you were saying, Loyola made that jump from the Horizon to the Missouri Valley, I thought to myself, that's a great point. And then I looked, and I had no idea that it's been 5 years since they made the jump. If you had asked me when Loyola was in the Horizon, I would have said like 2 seasons ago, which I don't know if that speaks more to the job he's done. The fact that I didn't even like notice or fully understand the transition. But it is an excellent point that that is a huge jump, and kind of similar to what we were saying with the Xavier program making that huge jump from the A10 to the Big East. It's not easy, and the transition being as seamless as it was is definitely notable, and it's definitely a huge mark in Porter Moser's favor.
Yeah, but certainly Porter is a great guy. He's gotten a lot of great publicity from this run, and he deserves it. He's a great coach. I think he's done a great job with this team in particular. I just think it is fair, when you're looking at other jobs, to kind of question the entire body of work in his time at Loyola and at Illinois State, and even before that at Arkansas, Little Rock. But there's another big hiring this week. That was Pittsburgh hiring Jeff Capel from the Duke staff. And Brad, as I said, I give this one an A-. Not because Jeff Capel is, when you say, what can we do at Pittsburgh? And when I think of that program, and the best is the lead assistant at Duke. I know I saw the list. It was Duke's lead assistants have now recently gone to Stanford, Northwestern, and Marquette. I think of Pitt as a better program than all three of those. But with where Pitt is now, I think this is a really good hire. I mean, this is a really tough spot. And what Pitt needs right now is a guy who can go get players and go get talent and go re-energize this thing. And we know Jeff Capel's going to go get talent. Let's put it that way. He got Blake Griffin at Oklahoma. He got this entire McDonald's All-American level class at Duke right now. Those 4 guys, I believe he recruited all 4 of them. So Jeff Capel's going to go get players, Brad. Whether it's going to translate into being a perennial NCAA tournament team at Pitt, I don't know that answer yet. But I think if I'm Pitt, that's a really good gamble to take over, say, a Mark Schmidt, over, say, a Tim Cluse. Even though those guys are great coaches, they just weren't the right guy now for Pitt. It would have taken so much time it would have taken 3 to 4 years for them to get, in my opinion, to get the program to the talent level of consistently competing for titles. And once they did, certainly they would have competed in the ACC and gotten to the NCAA tournament, but it would have taken so much time, the damage may have been done. And with Capel, I think they're going to bring in a ton of talent this year, next year, and maybe not, maybe not be an NCAA tournament team this year, but I think you're going to see a market improvement with this club.
Yeah, so they've already gotten Jared Wilson-Frame and Shamail Stevenson to come back. Both players had asked for their release to transfer, and I think we saw so much on Twitter, even the few hours before the Jeff Capel hire. Pitt fans moaning like, oh, we don't want Mark Schmidt. Oh, we're never going to get a good candidate. Oh, we should ask. I know. I saw that you tweeted that on the Pitt message boards. Some people wanted to ask Kevin Stallings back, which is just, it's so unbelievably sky is falling, Chicken Little attitude. It's so funny. But there are so many really good mid-major coaches out there. That there are so many candidates where Capel has a lot of buzz, and that's why he was an excellent hire. But there were like probably 10 to 12 guys that like they could have gone to in the mid-major ranks who would have been a solid addition for them. So I didn't really understand why so many Pitt fans were like panicking. The roster of potential coaching candidates willing to coach for over $3 million is very, very deep. And so they were in a great position where they couldn't really go wrong.
Yeah, I agree. I think they certainly had the list of mid-major coaches was there. I just don't think Pitt fans were going to be satisfied with them. And it had a very Tennessee football coach search feel to it, where not only the fans but the local media were against some of the hires and very strongly voiced. And it put Heather Lyke in a tough position. But to come out of it with Jeff Capel, I think is a win. You mentioned Shamil Stevenson. He's the guy I was highest on this roster, just in terms of the potential. You look at a guy with his size at 6'6". He can shoot the three a little bit. He can put it on the deck. He was kind of up and down this year, but when he was on, he was pretty impressive. Looking at the numbers this year, he averaged 8.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, shot 38% from the three, 51% from the field, only playing about 24 minutes. This is a guy I think who has an incredible upside. And so he's the type of guy who can be kind of one of the returning cornerstones. Now I think Parker Stewart is gone. That's kind of been the read I've gotten on his recruitment is he was gone whether or not Stallings was gone. Marcus Carr would be useful if nothing else because they really need a point guard. But Jeff Capel is going to be in on every big grad transfer. He's going to be big. He's going to go get a JUCO player. I don't know. He's going to go get some talent. Whatever's available, he's going to go recruit it. I think I saw that Nolan Smith, there's a good chance he's going to follow and be an assistant on this Pitt staff coming over from Duke. I know there's also discussion of Brandon Knight coming over. I don't know if that will come to fruition. I think Mike Rice, obviously disgraced at Rutgers, but I think he'd be a great candidate to be an assistant on this staff, not only because he has ties to the Pittsburgh program and he's certainly an accomplished recruiter, but the possibility to bring Scotty Lewis and Brian Antoine, two top 2019 kids, over to Pittsburgh, it would be really enticing as well if I'm Jeff Capel. So, I mean, that's kind of I think the plan is set in motion where you're not expecting to be an NCAA tournament team. You kind of flip this roster as quick as you can because there's a lot of dead weight here. Sure, Jared Wilson-Frame and Shamil Stevenson, Marcus Carr, those guys can play, but there's some pieces. Samson George, Peace Yagoma. There's some dead weight, as much as I hate to describe it that way on this roster, that isn't ACC talent. I think if you're Jeff Capel, you have to flip this thing quick, grab grad transfers and things like that who can play for 1 year and then focus on going nuts in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, and there are so many grad transfers out there right now, especially at the point guard position. I know there's Aaron Calixte, who is at Maine. Samford has 2 grad transfer point guards on the market with Kristen Cunningham and Justin Coleman. And there are certainly even more options out there. So any high major team who needs a point guard in this free agency cycle should definitely get one. They should definitely be able to grab at least a suitable replacement. I'm not sure which 2018 prospects are still out there except for Courtney Ramey. I know that Ty Strickland was kind of a late stock riser due to the scarcity of players left, and he popped to Wisconsin over Minnesota and Rutgers recently, which was kind of surprising to me. I know Wisconsin is the best program out of the 3, but they have Brad Davison and Demetric Trice, who will both be sophomore point guards, who will probably play a lot together. And they had another kid, I think his name is Trevor Anderson, who transferred to be a walk-on, but he was a scholarship player in I think the Horizon League. So there's certainly a lot of backcourt depth there. Sorry to get on a Ty Strickland tangent, but that's what happens when you have me on a podcast. Who I'm always looking ahead and projecting rosters.
No, it's good stuff. One other point guard who's out there is Brandon Williams, the decommit from Arizona. I know he's been connected to a bunch of Pac-12 schools, but I'm sure Jeff Capel will at least give him a call. On the grad transfer market, Joe Chartooni's a guy from Fordham who I could see being pretty attractive to a lot of teams. He's a guy who I think would be a great fit at a program. I've tweeted this a couple times at Northwestern. A guy who's excellent defensively. He's long. He can run the team. So I think he'd be a good fit with an athletic team like Northwestern. But Pittsburgh could also be involved with a guy like that. I know he's very academically conscious. He graduated in 3 years with a business degree from Fordham. So certainly a program like Pitt, which has a pretty good school. Northwestern, obviously a good academics program as well. Maybe a program like Stanford could be interested in some guard depth. Programs like that could intrigue Joe Chartooni. So certainly the talent is not as thin. Oh, here's another name who could come up as a point guard. James Akinjo from California. He was signed to UConn, just decommitted and got his LOI, got released from his LOI. He could be a fit at Pittsburgh as well if they're looking for a ball handler.
Seems like James Akinjo is either going to be Georgetown or Arizona. That's kind of the vibe I've been getting from Twitter. And then another grad transfer who has put up good numbers. I think he's a 2-guard. Full transparency. I've never seen him play. Could not pick him out of a lineup. But his name is Ihab Amin from Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Averaged like 17 and 6 in 16-17 and sat out this year, I believe, with an injury. So he's one of the more recent names to be on the grad transfer market. And then 2 sit-out transfers who are both very good point guards. One is a lot better than the second one, and this first one has been in the news a bit today. That's Malachi Flynn, who I think may be at this point the best transfer on the market. He had a great sophomore season at Washington State. I know he was in the mix for the U19 kind of Olympic team that they do each summer. I think he was cut from that team, but actually made his mark. And then the second guy is Brandon Averette from Oklahoma State, who's a sit 1, play 2. Doesn't have the stats of Flynn, but he's a solid and capable lead guard.
Yeah, Averette's interesting. I could see him at Illinois. Illinois had a lot of roster turnover. Tajon Lucas transferred. Michael Finke is transferring. I could see him maybe going to Grand Canyon. They lose a bunch of guys. I think it's pretty clear that they're trying to flip this thing. So I think I could see Averette, who I believe was signed at Stephen F. Austin with Brad Underwood, maybe trying to follow Underwood again for a third time, I guess it would be, because he followed him to Oklahoma State and then to now potentially to Illinois. So those are some interesting guys on the grad transfer list. Before we get into the 3-on-3 tournament, I did just want to mention, I'm sure you saw it, Brad, as we mentioned Malachi Flynn. That just poorly written, just poorly in poor taste article written by CougFan.com about Malachi Flynn. Did you see that one? Basically saying Ernie Kent gave him an opportunity when no one else did. Now Malachi Flynn's going to burn him by transferring. Thanks for nothing.
So I did not read the article, but I definitely saw the Twitter storm. Everyone from Kevin Sweeney to Sam Vecini, I saw tweeting about it, and it's just like a emotional fan reaction that should probably be kept to the message board. Was published to I don't know how reputable or how big that site is, but
I think it's a Scout site. I think it's like a division of Scout.
Oh, so it was like the moderator was very, very upset, I guess. But
it's a CBS Sports affiliate. Correction.
Oh man, yeah, because Scout and 24/7 merged recently.
Oh yeah,
but the point of this was Flynn's one offer in the high major is correct, I think, but the assumption that he should stick with the program no matter what. When this past offseason cycle, you got a guy in Drick Bernstein who you poached from a small, or not poached per se, but figuratively poached from a smaller program, and now you as the smaller program are getting mad when someone's going to grab Malachi Flynn from you is kind of hypocritical and small-minded and short-sighted.
Yeah, I thought that was an excellent point about Bernstein. I also thought it was just insane given the fact Malachi Flynn poured his heart into this team for 2 years. This team had nobody. This team was terrible without Malachi Flynn. Like, what is this roster won 4 games of the Pac-12 with Malachi Flynn and Robert Franks. This team is terrible. And they average 3,000 fans a game, which is the worst mark in the Power 5. As a reference, DePaul doubles their attendance. DePaul. And then you're going to come out and complain when the kid wants to transfer after he literally carried your team on his back for 2 seasons? Like, are you kidding me? I don't even want to talk about it anymore, Brad. It just really riles me up. I'm not like a transfer supporter. I'm not someone who's like, let's get rid of all the sit-out rules and like make it so that everyone goes willy-nilly. But at the same time, like if a kid wants to go transfer somewhere where he can win after giving you everything for 2 years, don't write a hate post on 247sports.com. Good God.
I think the even bigger domino was the first one. That's Robert Franks. Franks is one of the most improved players in the country. Combo forward, averaged like 17 a game. And if they had Franks back, if they had Flynn back, and they returned, I think their whole rotation except for Bernstein. Maybe you get a grad transfer center in there, and then maybe you're rolling. Maybe you'll get like an NIT berth a la Boston College. I know the Pac-12 hasn't been super strong. You can move up in that pretty easily, but once Franks and Flynn leave, you're back to 12th place. All the momentum is gone. And I could see why a fan would have that kind of vitriolic reaction. But like if you're going to write for your scout site or your 24/7 site, you need to have more of a measured take.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, Brad. Let's kind of segue into funner topics. That's just definitely not a word. More fun topics. It's late, guys. Sorry about that. Anyway, 3-on-3 tournament is coming up. I'm thoroughly excited about this event. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. In case you guys have missed it, it's seniors from around the country formed into 3-on-3 teams by conference, and then they play it out. I think this is going to be a great time. Brad, I know you're pretty excited about it. You've written some stuff over at Busting Brackets about it. What do you think here? What's kind of your initial reaction? Most of the rosters are released as of now. I think we've seen some guys decline bids because there's certainly not all the great seniors in college basketball. But it's going to be an exciting event.
Okay, so I should preface this where I'm a self-proclaimed 3-on-3 expert. I almost won 2 intramural 3-on-3 championships. Came away with 0, but I almost won 2. So I consider myself a supreme authority on this subject and how to build a team. And I think you really hit the nail on the head where guys must be opting out, which there's no great reason to do it on the surface because it is for money. And it's not winner take all. Like you get more money the further that you advance in the tournament, and there's a decent amount of exposure. And the Portsmouth Invitational, I checked, isn't until April 11th, so there's a whole 2-week period. So I don't know why some guys are dropping out. One thing that kind of I guess angered me when I saw some of these rosters at first was it kind of felt more like an all-star team than building a team, where I know a lot of I saw I think 2 or 3 mid-major leagues that were given 4 guards. I didn't know all the players that were on some of these mid-major leagues, but to give a team 4 guards is setting them up for failure, even if those were the 4 best seniors, because you have a team like the WCC that's going to have Jock Landale. You have some of these like really imposing big men scattered throughout this tournament, and I think giving a team not even the option to have a big like to defend them, puts them at a supreme disadvantage. And some of these teams, I think the Atlantic Sun was one that I noticed, and the other, the Big South. Well, they're in the Ivy League too, where those 3 teams are done. Like, they are out. That's it for them.
Yeah, the roster construction is kind of funky, as you mentioned. I saw the A10's roster was pretty funky. It had Jonathan Williams from VCU. It had Matt Mobley, a couple other guys, but it certainly wasn't the class.
And DeVell Roby. So that's another. I think Mobley is the center in that lineup.
Yeah, that's not ideal. One of the clubs that I think could make some noise was the America East, though. This is a smaller league for sure, but they have Jahad Thomas from UMass Lowell, who's kind of the perfect 3-on-3 player. He's about 6'4", can run a show a little bit. He can post you up. He rebounds extremely well. You have Trey Bell Haynes, who's extremely quick, runs the show, shoots it. You have Tanner Leisner, and you have Peyton Henson. So you have 4 guys on the floor. 4 guys, 3 of which will be on the floor. All of them can shoot. All of them can have at least some ability to put the ball on the deck. I think that's an intriguing group for a 3-on-3 tournament. I also like the Horizon League look. I don't think it's a great roster, but Kendrick Nunn's just a stud, and he's going to go get buckets. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah, I am very glad that you pointed those 2 conferences out, because those 2 conferences stuck out to me too as being both well built and extremely talented. One note on the American East, very surprised that no Jarius Lyles. He was someone. So I had written the article for Busting Brackets about a month ago, projecting the teams for the Power 6 conferences, and then I had started doing one about a week before conference tournament season of all the other leagues. I got about halfway through, and I realized this is a ton of work, and there's probably not going to be a ton of interest with all this bracketology going on. So I kind of scrapped it. But I had Jarius Lyles instead of Trey Bell Haynes. So this is one of the conferences where everyone that they could get, for the most part, they got, and this is a extremely well built team. And then in the Horizon, this is a team that is very talented. They have shooters, they have a big, they have a point guard, they have an athletic scorer in Kendrick Nunn. They have a lot of different pieces. I kind of wish that they had a combo forward, but nonetheless, this is a very talented group.
Yeah, one more from the mid-major ranks before we can look at a couple of the bigger rosters that came out. I know the Big Ten's out. But the OVC has an interesting group. Austin Luke, who's a pure passer at point guard. Then you have 3 bigs, so kind of strange roster construction. But all 3 have varying floor spacing ability. Amanze Ejikezi can put it on the deck. He's kind of more of a combo forward. Terrell Miller, who we saw just go nuts in the NCAA tournament. He's fun. And Avery Ugba, who is a grad transfer at Austin P, who began his career at Grambling. It's like a double-double guy this year. So, they're going to be tough up front, and both Miller and Ejikezi can put the ball on the deck a little bit. So I think that could be a fun little group.
Yeah, I had noticed that too about the OVC. I've never seen Avery Ugba play, but I know that they listed him as a forward. And then Miller and Ejikezi, their games kind of overlap. They're both kind of stretch fours. I know Ejikezi shoots, I think, most of his shots from deep. Trying to think another one. The MEAC. I have no idea who any of those players are on the MEAC. So I can't give a lot of insight into that. But the Metro really stuck out to me too, where they have Jermaine Crumpton, who's kind of like a undersized 4-man kind of do-it-all guy for Canisius. He's a very good player. And they have Tyler Nelson from Fairfield, who's I'll say he's a elite shooter and averaged over 20 points a game. for the Stags.
Yeah, that's a good group. They've got Nelson, who's kind of a good 3-on-3 player. Rich Williams is kind of a swingman 2-3 who can really light it up from downtown when he gets rolling. And then Waterman from Manhattan, as well as Crumpton from Canisius, two guys who can stretch the floor. Waterman's a good rim protector, actually, so maybe that comes into play. So, yeah, there's some interesting mid-major rosters here. It's one of those where we don't necessarily know exactly how these games are going to look, whether are guys going to be focused, is there going to be defense played, how competitive is it going to be? You'd think it's going to be pretty competitive with the money on the line, but, I mean, I think that does make it interesting how it's going to look. So I think it has a chance to be pretty fun. It's kind of hard to predict how roster construction will lead to victories because we don't know how the pace will be, how things like that. But I think there's some good mid-major clubs. I know the Americans out with B.J. Tyson from East Carolina, A.J. Davis from UCF, Shaq Morris, and Connor Frankamp from Wichita State. I saw the Big Ten roster, but that's escaped me. Brad, do you have that one?
Yes, the Big Ten roster is Robert Johnson, Jayshawn Tate, Vincent Edwards, and Nate Mason. I thought, so when I projected this team, I had Vincent Edwards, I had Nate Mason, and then Jayshawn Tate was one of my last cuts. I went with Isaac Haas because post play is really big in a 3-on-3. There's so much space that it is much easier to score in the post. But Haas is obviously hurt, and then Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman is in the Final Four, so he's out. Kind of surprised that Robert Johnson got the nod over Dakota Mathias, and also kind of surprised that Jayshawn. Well, and this is one of the things that I was referring to with all-star game over roster construction. Where like for the Big Ten, a guy like Deshaun Freeman from Rutgers, I think he would be a better fit as kind of a mobile big than kind of Vincent Edwards and Jayshawn Tate, who will have to guard some of these bigger players. While they're capable, I think Freeman would have been, a better solution there.
Yeah, that's a good call. I was kind of hoping to see either Bryant McIntosh or Scotty Lindsey on there. I'm sure you were. Is the Big East come out yet, Brad? Are any Providence guys gonna be on there?
Yeah. So a late scratch. All right. So the Big East is Andrew Rousey, J.P. McCura, Desi Rodriguez, and Rodney Bullock is a late addition for Trayvon Blewett, who supposedly dropped out.
That's a heck of a group. So
there are actually 4 conferences now that the 4 guys that I projected for them, 0 are on the actual team. The Big East is 1 because I had when I did this about a month ago, I had Marcus Foster, Keelan Martin, Trayvon Blewett, and Angel Delgado. So that's totally different. And then you had mentioned the AAC earlier. The AAC team that I had was Gary Clark, Junior Etow, Rob Gray, and Cameron Reynolds from Tulane. And then 2 other groups that have come out where I had totally different is the Atlantic 10. We talked about the Atlantic 10 roster earlier. I had Justin Tillman, Jared Terrell, BJ Johnson, and Jalen Adams. This is a conference that had a ton of senior talent because that didn't even include Peyton Aldridge, E.C. Matthews, or Utah Watanabe. And to have none of those guys in it, that's like 10 or like 8 guys that I think would be better than the guys that they actually got on the team. So that's really interesting. And then just lastly, to kind of end my rant here, for the WAC, I had Nick Dixon from Rio Grande Valley, Zach Lofton, Jamario Jones, and Akolda Manyang, the center for Utah Valley. And none of those players were on the team. The actual WAC team was Jordan Hill, Brandon Randolph, Josh Braun, and Keontae Vernon.
Good stuff. Yeah, I think the roster construction, it stinks, but I think it's kind of to be expected. Our guys gonna throw an injury risk at a 3-on-3 tournament when Portsmouth's coming up, when pre-draft stuff's coming up, when quite frankly these guys are trying to graduate. You're missing another weekend when you've got all these draft stuff to do and handle. So I can understand why guys wouldn't want to do it. I'm certainly excited for the guys that are. I think it's going to be a fun event. Before we sign off on this one, let's go with some very quick picks on both the 3-point contest and the dunk contest. I'll rattle off the names real quick, Brad, and you can kind of make a pick. I'll make mine as well. For the slam dunk contest, we have Junior Robinson, the 5'5" kid from Mount St. Mary's. I don't know if he's planning on actually dunking or doing jelly layups, but either way, I'm here for it. Deshaun Patterson from Tabor College, which is not D1. Carlton Hurst from South Dakota. Joe Kilgore from Texas A&M Corpus Christi. TK Adogi from Iona, who can jump out of the gym at 6'8". Zach Smith from Texas Tech. Jacoby Boykins, Louisiana Tech. And Max Pierce from Purchase College. Brad, any hot takes before we let us go on the dunk contest?
I want to lean Zach Smith, but I think probably one of the guards is a better option. I'll go with the first kid that you mentioned that was not a D1 player.
All right, excellent. So one vote for Deshaun Patterson.
There you go.
I'm gonna roll a Junior Robinson because I think any 5'5" dunk that winds up going through the rim deserves a 10. And I think they should see that as well. I actually thought it was a joke when I saw Mount St. Mary's announcement. I was like, oh, no, you're kidding, right? Because I know he could bounce, and I wasn't surprised that he could dunk, but being in a dunk contest, I have no idea what he's planning to do, but I'm excited to see it. I will probably be tuned in just to see exactly what happens there. 3-point contest, real quick. Andrew Rousey, Marquette. Connor Birchfield, William and Mary. Connor Frankamp, Wichita State. Jonathan Stark, Murray State. Donovan Jackson, Iowa State. Dakota Mathias, Purdue. Marcus Foster, Creighton, and Matt Farrell from Notre Dame. Some really big names here, Brad.
Yeah, I was surprised. So a lot of those guys should be in this 3-on-3 tournament. Makes me think that they decided to focus on the 3-point contest, which I think is for no money. But I mean, less competition, I guess. 32 teams versus only 8 competitors. I'm going with Andrew Rousey from Marquette, who is in both the 3-on-3 and the 3-point contest. Trying to build his brand, I guess, before the Portsmouth Invitational.
Yeah, I was actually going to roll with Rousey as well. I'll make it interesting and pick old man Frankamp. Connor Frankamp from Wichita State is my pick. Brad, anything else before we wrap this podcast up? It's been kind of everywhere. We went Final Four, coaching changes, grad transfers, and college 3-point contest, 3-on-3, and dunk contest.
So I would just like to thank everyone for listening through my 3-on-3 rant. But before I completely end my 3-on-3 obsession, do you want to pick a conference that you think will win this tournament, Kevin?
Sure. I'm gonna go Big East. I thought that group was intriguing. I think Rousey's a type who could just go nuts in a 3-on-3. So I'm gonna roll with them.
So that was gonna be my selection as well. But I'm gonna make a kind of condition here. I think so. The WCC roster has not been released yet, but I had projected it would be Jock Landale, Calvin Hermanson, Silas Melson, and Henry Caruso. And I think if that's the roster, even though they're going to put Jonathan Williams on there, but anyway, if Landale and shooters are on the team, I'm going with the WCC. If either Landale is on the team and there are no shooters or vice versa, I will go with the Big East.
All right, chug it up. Thanks for everybody for listening to a wild podcast. As always, what more would you expect from us? We will be back with a champion next week. I would assume we will record sometime after the national championship game, early next week, and kind of break all of that down. So look forward to that. Look forward to the weekend of college basketball. The last one, always bittersweet. But thanks as always for tuning in, and I hope you guys have a great night.